Again, we're back. I'm going to talk about Chapter 8, Hypothesis Testing. We have been making these videos and trying to make them conform to the YouTube situations, which means that we have to cut them down to 10 minutes or less. That also makes them into a bunch of short ones. I assume that this one's probably going to end up being about 3. Be my best guess right now. I guess that's kind of good because you can watch one and walk away and clear your head a little bit or something like that. But again, we've got some material that we've already produced on this, and so we're going to try to use that. I will break in as needed and try to correct some of the mistakes I may have made or clarify some of the other information. Hypothesis test. In this chapter, we're going to start tying together a lot of the things that we've covered in the first part of the course, and so I'll try to bring that information in as we come along. So the situation is this: we've got someone does a study, 1 sample, 2 sample, 3 sample, related pairs, independent samples, nominal data, ordinal data. You have all that information on, how on those terms and how to go through and to understand those kind of things. And so we're going to try to tie all that together and show you how that is important when we go through and try to make a decision about what hypothesis test to use and how we do it. So the purpose of this particular chapter is to go through and say, overall, this is how you would do a hypothesis test. We use some examples to say this is how we would, some examples of how it's applied, but the same overall concepts that we're going to go over in this chapter will be repeated in the chapters that follow it. So the first thing that we do when we get ready to do a hypothesis is we go through and we specify what we're going to call the null hypothesis. And the null hypothesis has got a very strict form. A null hypothesis has to have an equal sign in it. Okay? So it could be something like, a lot of times we'll just put H sub O to say the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that the mean, mu, is greater than or equal to 0. Or we could have the null hypothesis, the mean is equal to 0. Or we could have the null hypothesis, the mean is less than or equal to 0. All of those forms have equal in the null hypothesis. Now it turns out that these are different types. This is a one-tailed because it specifies a direction. That's what this greater than sign, it says that that's the direction. The direction is here with the less than sign on this one. So this is also going to be a one-tailed. Since we do not specify a direction, this one is called a two-tailed. So, it can so in this particular one, we're looking for a one-tailed test is going to have 5%. If you're doing it to 5%, it's going to have 5% in that one-tailed. In a two-tailed test, it's going to have 2.5% in each of the tails. Okay, so that's how it's going to play out in that area. So the null hypothesis. And then once you've got the null hypothesis specified, then you go through and you can identify the alternative hypothesis, which is just going to be the opposite of this one. If mu is greater than or equal to 0, the alternative is mu is less than 0. The second one, the mean is equal to 0, the mean is not equal to 0 would be the alternative. And on the last one here, you just reverse that and you'd have the mean is greater than 0. Actually, this is the one that you want to prove. In statistics, we can't ever accept anything. We can just reject. And there's some examples of that, but you can't give enough evidence to make sure that you can prove this for sure. But you can go through and you say, well, this particular alternative, you can reject that alternative. So what we want to do in a statistical test is we want to reject the null hypothesis, and that gives evidence that the alternative hypothesis is true. And so just just keep in mind that in the statistics you can't ever accept anything. Okay, so once we have that, then we go through and we do it as we design the study, and we go through and check. In the design of the study, we're going to set up our critical value. Most of the time, that's going to be 5%. It's a one-tailed, two-tailed based on the hypothesis. You can get that from there. We're going to go through and we're going to design the sample. We're going to go through and do things like the type of data that we're going to collect, the type of, we're going to be able to go through and to get the size of the sample. Okay? And then we're going to go through and we're going to collect the data. And here we're going to go through and we're going to check for the assumptions, normality. We're going to describe the data. Okay, now, when we go back and talk about this, the critical value and the p-value and those kind of things, this is what we talked about. A lot of this came out of Chapter 5, okay, where we talked about, Chapter 4. Okay, this is probably a pretty good time to break it at this point. Now, I did pick up a couple of mistakes that I made, or not mistakes in one case, but in one case it was a mistake. And so let me go ahead and correct that right quick. The mistake was the second one, that the critical value, I say critical value, that should be the significance level. You go through and you specify your significance level as the 0.05 or whatever. And then another point I do want to emphasize again is that when I talk about the alternative or the alternate hypothesis, that is essentially the research hypothesis. That's what you want to reject. If you can reject, you want to reject the null hypothesis, and that will give you evidence for the alternative hypothesis. So we'll break away, then we'll come back and carry